You're crouched at the edge of camp. It's the dead of night 40,000 years ago. Something is moving in the dark just past the firelight. It's not stalking you. It's not running away either. It's just watching. And the terrifying part isn't the eyes glowing in the shadows. The terrifying part is that tomorrow, someone in your camp is going to throw it a scrap of meat. On purpose. That single act, a scared, hungry human tossing food to a dangerous predator, is where this story begins. Not with a plan. Not with a decision to build a companion species. With an accident so strange that if you saw it happen today, you'd assume someone had lost their mind. Because here's the thing nobody tells you about dogs. They shouldn't exist. Wolves are not friendly animals. They're apex predators with jaws that can crush bone, pack hunters that take down elk twice their size, and creatures so wired for survival that trusting a human should have gotten them killed. And yet somehow, somewhere between 40,000 and 15,000 years ago, one of the deadliest animals on the planet decided humans were safe to sleep next to. How does that even happen? You'd think the answer is simple. Humans found wolf puppies, raised them, and trained them. That's the story most people believe. It's clean. It's comforting. It's also almost certainly wrong. Because raising a wild wolf pup doesn't make it tame. Scientists have tried this. Modern researchers have hand-raised wolf pups from birth, bottle-fed them, slept next to them, loved them like family. And by adulthood, those wolves were still wolves. Unpredictable. Dangerous. Not dogs. So if raising them by hand doesn't work, how did it actually happen? This is where the story stops being cute and starts being disturbing. Picture this instead. You're not adopting a wolf pup. You're a human trying to survive a brutal Ice Age winter, and there's a pile of bones and scraps outside your camp, the leftover waste from your kills. Wolves are starving. Some are too aggressive to come near humans. They get speared. They die. But a small number of wolves are different, slightly less reactive, slightly less likely to attack when a human walks close, slightly calmer around firelight and noise. And those wolves survive to scavenge again tomorrow. Now here's the part that should make your skin crawl a little. You didn't domesticate wolves. You executed the aggressive ones without realizing it. Every time a nervous, dangerous wolf got too close and got killed, and every time a calm, low-reactivity wolf slipped away safely with a bone in its mouth, you were running a selection experiment. Without knowing it. Without meaning to. For thousands of years. But here's what scientists actually found when they tested this idea directly, and it's the kind of discovery that changes how you see your own dog sleeping on your couch right now. In the 1950s, a Russian scientist named Dmitry Belyaev wanted to know if this accidental selection idea could actually work. So he ran an experiment on foxes. Not dogs. Foxes. Wild, aggressive silver foxes that would bite your hand off if you got close. He didn't train them. He didn't socialize them heavily. He did one thing and one thing only. Every generation, he picked the calmest, least aggressive foxes and bred them together. That's it. No taming. No teaching tricks. Just selecting for one trait, tolerance of humans. Within a few generations, something happened that should not have been biologically possible that fast. The fox's ears started flopping like a puppy's. Their tails began to curl and wag. Their fur changed color, developing white patches. Their skulls got shorter. Their faces got rounder, more juvenile looking. They started whining for attention, licking hands, seeking out human contact like they'd been bred as pets for 1,000 years. Even though this had only been going on for a few generations. Read that again. Selecting for one behavioral trait, friendliness, physically rewired an entire animal's body, face, and biology as a side effect. Nobody was trying to make them cuter. Nobody bred for floppy ears. It happened automatically, because tameness and physical, puppy-like traits are apparently wired together deep in the genome. And that's the moment scientists realized. This is probably exactly what happened to wolves. Except nature did it instead of a lab. The wolves that could tolerate humans got a free meal. The wolves that couldn't got killed or starved. Generation after generation, the pool of wolves lingering near human camps became calmer, friendlier, less reactive, and their bodies started changing to match. Smaller teeth, shorter snouts, floppier ears, more expressive faces. the literal blueprint for what a dog looks like today. But here's the disturbing twist buried inside that discovery. You didn't build dogs on purpose. Dogs are the byproduct of an accidental execution filter that ran for thousands of years around human trash heaps. The most loyal, loving animal on Earth exists because your ancestors unknowingly killed off every wolf that wasn't calm enough to handle being near people. Sit with that for a second. Because there's a version of this same filter running in human societies today, and it's not as far removed as you'd think. Every workplace, every social group, every family system quietly rewards the calm, cooperative, low-conflict people with access and resources, and pushes out the reactive, aggressive ones. We call it culture or fit. Our ancestors were running that exact selection process on wolves without a single word for genetics. This is the point where most videos about dog domestication stop. They give you the fox experiment, they give you the trash heap theory, and they wrap it up in a bow. Cute story, right? Humans and wolves, best friends forever. Except that's not even close to the whole story. Because what you're about to hear next was buried in academic papers for decades, mostly ignored, because it makes people deeply uncomfortable. And once you hear it, you will never look at your dog's face the same way again. Here's the reframe that changes everything you think you know. For a long time, scientists assumed dogs were domesticated because early humans wanted hunting partners. It made sense on paper. A human with a dog can track prey faster, corner animals better, defend the kill from other predators. Dogs equal survival tools. Clean narrative. Except the timeline doesn't actually support that story, and when researchers dug into it, they found something that completely upends the man's best hunting tool idea. Genetic evidence suggests wolves began splitting off into a separate, human-adjacent population somewhere between 40,000 and 20,000 years ago, long before humans were actively hunting big game with organized weapons in the way that would make a hunting partner theory make sense. In other words, dogs may have started becoming dogs before humans ever had a use for them as hunting tools. Which raises an unsettling question. If we didn't domesticate wolves for a practical reason, why did it happen at all? The answer researchers landed on is almost uncomfortable in how mundane it sounds, until you realize the implications. It wasn't strategy. It wasn't planning. It was proximity and tolerance. Humans generated waste. Wolves scavenged waste. The wolves that could handle being close to humans without panicking or attacking got fed. Accidentally, passively, without a single human deciding to start domesticating an animal. Domestication may not have been something we did to wolves at all. It may be something that happened because we simply didn't stop it. We didn't drive them away with enough force, enough consistency to prevent it. That distinction matters more than it seems, because it means dogs may be the result of humans doing nothing, of humans tolerating a dangerous predator's presence simply because killing every single one wasn't worth the energy. Evolution filled that gap in behavior all on its own. And this is where the psychology gets genuinely disturbing, because the same principle shows up in modern human relationships constantly, and most people never notice it happening to them. Proximity plus low-level tolerance creates bonding, even when there was never a conscious decision to bond. Think about every relationship you've ever had with someone you didn't choose, a coworker, a roommate, a childhood neighbor, where closeness alone created attachment you never actually decided to form. Your brain doesn't require a plan to bond with something. It just requires repeated, low-threat exposure. That's it. That's the entire mechanism. Wolves became dogs because of it. And a disturbing number of human relationships form the exact same way, without either party choosing it consciously. But here's what scientists actually found that takes this even further into unsettling territory. It's not just that wolves tolerated humans. Something inside their brains was changing in real time, and it wasn't behavioral training. It was biological. Researchers studying early dog and wolf skulls found consistent shrinkage in specific brain regions tied to fear response and aggression, compared to wild wolves. Not intelligence regions, fear regions. The animals weren't getting dumber. They were getting less reactive at a neurological level generation after generation. Their nervous systems were being reshaped by selection pressure, the same way Belyaev's fox's nervous systems were reshaped in a lab decades later. Which means the modern dog sleeping at your feet right now doesn't just look different from a wolf. Its brain is wired fundamentally differently. Less fear, less aggression, more willingness to bond, to trust, to attach to something outside its own species. That's not a personality. That's the literal architecture of its brain, shaped by thousands of years of humans unintentionally filtering out fear. Now here's a question that should make you a little uneasy. If an animal's fear response and aggression can be selected out of existence in a matter of generations, through nothing more than who survives and who doesn't, what does that say about the humans running the selection? Because we weren't passive bystanders in this process. We were, functionally, an extinction event for aggressive wolves. Every time a threatening wolf got speared near camp, we were engineering the next generation without realizing it. That's not a partnership story. That's a slow-motion filtration system with teeth. And it doesn't stop at wolves. Because once you understand this mechanism, proximity, tolerance, unintentional selection, you start seeing it everywhere in how humans shape the animals, and even the people around them. What you're about to hear next was mostly left out of the pop science version of this story, because it complicates the friendly narrative people want to believe. It's the part that sits right at the center of this whole story, hidden in plain sight, and once you know it, you can't unsee it. Some researchers believe the wolves who first tolerated human camps weren't just the calmest ones. They may have specifically been the outcasts. Wolf packs are built on strict hierarchy, and low-ranking wolves, the ones pushed to the edges, denied food, harassed by dominant pack members, are the ones most likely to break away and scavenge alone near unfamiliar territory, including human camps. In other words, the wolves that became dogs may not have been the strongest, boldest members of their species. They may have been the rejects, the ones who couldn't hold their place in wolf society and had nowhere else to go. Sit with that for a second, because it reframes the entire origin of man's best friend. The animal now considered the most loyal companion on Earth may have descended from creatures that were socially discarded by their own kind, and found belonging with a completely different species instead. That's not a survival strategy. That's a species being cast out and finding home somewhere nobody expected. Does that sound familiar? It should, because it's a pattern that shows up constantly in human history and human psychology too. The people who don't fit cleanly into one group are often the ones who form the deepest, most unconventional bonds elsewhere, precisely because the door back to where they came from was closed. Ancient wolves weren't choosing humans out of some noble instinct. They may have been choosing humans because their own species had nothing left to offer them. This is the midpoint of the story, and it's exactly where the narrative most people know starts to fall apart entirely. Because everything up to this point, the trash heaps, the calm wolves, the fox experiment, is still the safe version of dog domestication. It's the version that leaves out what actually happened to the wolves that didn't make the cut. You need to understand something brutal about early human-wolf contact before the friendly narrative can make sense. For every wolf that became calmer, more tolerant, more dog-like, there were far more that didn't. And those wolves weren't gently shooed away. They were killed, speared, driven off cliffs, trapped and eaten. Ancient humans were not gentle animal lovers slowly coaxing wild predators into friendship with kindness. They were desperate survivors in brutal conditions, and any wolf that showed aggression near a human camp was a threat to be eliminated, often violently, often permanently. The soft, cuddly version of dog domestication that gets repeated in documentaries skips over the fact that domestication, at its core, was a slow, ongoing act of violence against an entire species, with survival granted only to the individuals willing to suppress their natural instincts around humans. That's not a friendship story. That's a filtration system built on thousands of years of death. And here's the part that should genuinely disturb you. This selection pressure didn't just remove aggressive wolves from the gene pool. It may have permanently reshaped how an entire species experiences fear, stress, and trust. Forever. We didn't just tame a few individuals. We altered the trajectory of an entire branch of life on Earth, using nothing but who got to live and who didn't. Now compare that to how humans talk about domestication today. Words like companionship, loyalty, partnership, soft words for a process that, at its origin, ran almost entirely on death and desperation. This isn't meant to make you feel guilty about loving your dog. It's meant to show you how thoroughly history gets rewritten once something becomes comfortable and familiar. We do this constantly, sanding down brutal, chaotic origins into clean, comforting stories, because the truth is harder to sit with. But here's what scientists actually found next, and it's the piece of evidence that most people have never heard, because it complicates the humans were in control the whole time narrative even further. Genetic studies comparing ancient dog DNA to modern dog and wolf populations revealed something strange. Several ancient dog lineages, populations that existed thousands of years ago, don't have direct descendants today. They went extinct. Entire branches of early dogs already living alongside humans, already domesticated, simply vanished from the genetic record. Which means domestication wasn't a single clean event where wolves became dogs and that was that. It happened over and over in multiple locations at different times, and many of those attempts failed. Entire populations of early proto-dogs didn't survive long enough to become the dogs we know today. Think about that. Domestication wasn't one lucky accident. It was multiple accidents happening independently, most of which collapsed and disappeared. The dogs sitting in living rooms around the world right now are the survivors of an evolutionary process that failed far more often than it succeeded. You're not looking at the inevitable outcome of human-wolf contact. You're looking at the rare version that happened to work, surrounded by the ghosts of the versions that didn't. This should shift something in how you think about inevitability in general. We tend to look backward at history and assume everything that happened was destined to happen. Dogs exist, so of course dogs were always going to exist. But that's a comforting illusion. The actual record shows chaos, failure, extinction, and one thin thread of success that happened to survive into the present. History isn't a straight line toward what exists now. It's a graveyard of attempts, with a handful of survivors telling the story. And here is where the story pushes into territory that most videos about dog domestication refuse to touch at all, because it's the darkest part, and it's the part that's been sitting quietly underneath everything you've just heard. If the early stages of domestication ran on which wolves got killed and which ones didn't, what happened to the wolves in between? The ones that weren't fully calm, but weren't fully aggressive either. The in-between animals. Because evidence suggests early humans didn't just passively let calm wolves survive and kill the aggressive ones. In several archaeological sites, researchers have found evidence that early proto-dogs were sometimes killed and eaten. Not accidentally, not in warfare with wild wolves, but deliberately as a food source, even as some individuals of the same broader population were being kept close to camp. Let that sink in for a second. At the exact same time some early humans were nurturing a bond with proto-dogs, tolerating them near the fire, feeding them scraps, other early humans, or even the same groups in leaner seasons, were killing and eating members of that same emerging population. Companionship and consumption existing side by side, depending entirely on how desperate the winter was. This wasn't cruelty for its own sake. It was survival math in its rawest form. A friendly animal near your camp was useful when food was available. But when a brutal winter hit and starvation was real, that same animal could become the difference between your children living or dying. The emotional bond humans were forming with early dogs did not override the brutal calculus of survival. It coexisted with it. This is the truth most retellings leave out entirely, because it doesn't fit the warm, feel-good arc people want from a story about how dogs became our best friends. The reality is messier and colder. The relationship between early humans and proto-dogs wasn't a straight line from strangers to soulmates. It was a relationship built on convenience, tolerance, and survival. One that could flip from companionship to consumption depending entirely on how hungry you were. And if that unsettles you, here's the part that should unsettle you even more. That same brutal calculation, where affection and utility exist on the same spectrum, shifting depending on circumstance, still exists in human relationships today. We don't like to admit it, but human bonds have always had a survival logic underneath the emotional one. People stay close to those who are useful to their survival, and that usefulness has always shaped who gets protected and who gets abandoned, even in modern life, even when we tell ourselves love is unconditional. Ancient humans weren't uniquely cold for treating early dogs this way. They were just more honest about a pattern that still quietly runs underneath human relationships today. Now here's the reveal that changes how you look at every dog you'll ever meet again. The piece of evidence saved for exactly this moment, because it recontextualizes everything you've just heard. For decades, scientists believed dogs became fully dog only after humans had already settled into agricultural societies. After farms, after permanent villages, after humans had a stable enough lifestyle to support keeping animals purely for companionship rather than survival value. But newer genetic dating has pushed the timeline of domestication back much further, into the depths of the last ice age, tens of thousands of years before agriculture existed at all. Which means dogs weren't the product of a comfortable, settled human civilization with room for sentiment. Dogs emerged from some of the harshest, most brutal survival conditions our species has ever faced. Ice Age humans were dealing with extreme cold, food scarcity, competition from other massive predators like cave hyenas and saber-toothed cats, and constant threat of starvation. And in the middle of all of that, in the worst conditions imaginable, an act of tolerance toward a dangerous predator managed to survive and take root anyway. Not because life was easy enough to allow for kindness, but somehow, even in a world defined by scarcity and death, something resembling connection found a way to survive. That reframes the entire story in a way that should genuinely move you. Dogs didn't happen because humans had the luxury of compassion. Dogs happened in spite of not having that luxury. Some ancient humans, freezing, starving, surrounded by death, still made room, again and again, for a dangerous animal that offered nothing guaranteed in return. That single, repeated choice, made under some of the worst conditions our species has ever endured, is the reason a dog is probably lying near you right now. And here's the modern mirror to that, the third and final connection between ancient behavior and who you are today. Humans have never needed comfortable circumstances to form bonds. Some of the strongest connections in human history, and in your own life, were formed under stress, scarcity, and fear, not in spite of those conditions but sometimes because of them. Shared hardship creates attachment faster and deeper than shared comfort ever does. Ancient humans and proto-dogs didn't bond over abundance. They bonded over survival. And if you think about the relationships in your own life that feel unbreakable, there's a good chance they were forged the exact same way. Not during the easy years, but during the hard ones. So here's where this leaves you. The story you were taught, that humans cleverly tamed wolves into loyal companions, isn't really what happened. What actually happened is stranger, messier, and far more human. A dangerous predator's most fearful, reactive individuals kept getting killed near human camps, while the calmest ones kept surviving, generation after generation, until an entirely new species emerged almost as a side effect. Humans weren't master trainers. We were an unintentional filter, running for tens of thousands of years, shaping an entire species without ever writing down a single rule. The wolves that became dogs may have been the outcasts of their own kind, pushed toward humans because their own society had nothing left for them. They lived alongside a species that sometimes loved them and sometimes ate them, depending entirely on how brutal the season was. Entire branches of early dogs went extinct before the ones you know today ever existed. And the whole process began not in comfort, but in some of the harshest survival conditions humans have ever lived through. None of that makes the bond between humans and dogs less real. If anything, it makes it more remarkable, because it means this relationship wasn't inevitable. It wasn't guaranteed. It survived thousands of years of violence, scarcity, extinction, and brutal circumstance. And it still made it all the way to you, sitting right now, maybe with a dog somewhere nearby who has no idea any of this happened. So the next time a dog looks at you with total, unearned trust, remember what that trust actually cost to create. Thousands of years, countless deaths, entire extinct lineages, a species reshaped down to its brain chemistry, just to be capable of loving something that isn't its own kind. That's not a cute origin story. That's one of the strangest, most brutal, most quietly miraculous things that has ever happened between two species on this planet, and it's still happening every single time a dog chooses to lie down next to a human instead of running away.